Hey, welcome back to Panhandle Pulse. Today's guest is Owen Girard, known online for his real conversations, purpose-driven, discipline, and faith. Owen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chuck.
Yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation. So for our listeners here in the Panhandle, tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and what shaped you.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Tallahassee, Florida. That's where I really got my start. When I turned 18, I said, I want to get involved in the conservative movement. So I started volunteering, door knocking on campaigns in the 2022 midterms. And that's kind of just how I started building connections and growing. From there, I spent some time working in the Florida State Capitol. So I got a nice legislative experience working through college. Also, throughout college, I worked for a Florida-based political media outlet covering conservative politics in the Panhandle. And then throughout all that time, I was involved with Turning Point USA as a student leader. So once I graduated from Florida State, I started working at Turning Point full-time as a field representative. And now I'm the Florida Panhandle Field Representative for Turning Point.
Nice, good. And I know you've been busy up here presenting to groups around the area, and how's that kicking off for 26 and the plans that you have for that?
It's really good. It's awesome to have the community support. So many of these students that I talk to, they're starting out these chapters. They're really small to start out, right? I mean, Chipola College and stuff, and a lot of these other awesome schools, they only have a few people starting these chapters out. But showing the community showing their support, whether it's the local REC or any other local conservative groups, whether it's donating or just, sharing their insight and wisdom on what it's like to, lead political organizations is huge for the students. So I always love going and speaking with the community really anywhere because it's just so crucial. And then, of course, bringing the students along because I really want them to be involved in the full political process, both on and off campus. So we're going to continue to, keep getting the community involved with what Turning Point USA is doing here in the Panhandle, inviting them to our big events when we bring big speakers to campuses. And so it's really awesome to see that happening, and we're going to continue to do it.
Good. No, that's amazing. It's great. I think all young students and our younger generation need to be involved in groups and diversify all their input and their education and their opinions. That's the way we all get smarter, and that's the way we learn, and it helps grow up the next generation, especially in faith and in politics. Because back when I was going to school, so I'm a little bit older than you, we had some of those in there. We had the history classes that were focused on history, not changed on truth and factual, but we need a lot more of that today.
Definitely, yeah. And that's such a big component, especially here in the Panhandle for so many students, is that faith component. And they want to bring scripture and Jesus really into their chapter. And it's so awesome to see that, And of course, we have TPUSA Faith, which is our faith related branch of Turning Point. And they do a ton of amazing work with pastors and with churches and all that kind of stuff. So, working and bridging those areas of Turning Point with our college chapters is huge. And it's awesome to see the revival happening on college campuses all across the country, but particularly here, where we're really blessed to be in a wonderful, very conservative part of the state. And it's awesome to see that, but it's really special to see it in Gen Z, in young people who are on fire for their faith and to spread the word of Christ. And, it's just awesome to see that and see them doing that through their political activism.
Yeah, definitely, especially the younger generation involved in the church is amazing. So what led you to Turning Point and just the movement that was in there? How did you come about that?
Yeah, so I actually have a funny story. I started out on the left, and when I was growing up in middle school and early high school, I was a full-on Bernie Sanders supporter, and a big Democratic socialist, wasn't Christian at all. And, I was that because that's what all my friends were, right? That's what all the social groups around me were. And a lot of the people, my mentors and adults that I looked up to in life, whether, in school related stuff or whatever, they were all kind of pushing that kind of agenda and beliefs on me and on my peers. And it wasn't until really, I got through high school that I started looking at the world around me and saying, there's really two paths to go down if you generalize it. And one is the path that a lot of my peers are going down, which is a path of, they don't really know their purpose in life. They don't really know why their life matters, why this world matters, why the people in it most importantly matter. And it's leading them to a lot of, depression and anxiety and stress and even a lot of suicidal thoughts. And I mean, I would just see that happen to other young people around me. And I'm like, I don't want that, So then I started exploring and looking and seeing both in the spiritual aspect and in the political aspect and the social and all of these different areas of the world. And I'm like, what is the truth, right? What is going to lead to the prosperity of not just my life, but I mean, I want to have a family someday. I want to be able to provide and take care of them. And what is the ideologies, what is the belief systems that are going to lead to that? And I spent all these years, it was funny, hating on Christians, hating on conservatives. And then I end up, after doing research and really after opening up my heart and my mind, I was able to see, alternative ways of thinking, and that they were actually right, and Turning Point USA was a big played a big role in that, right? Doing my research online, I'd see the Charlie Kirk videos, especially like during COVID, in 2020, during the lockdowns. I really had a lot of time to do that research, and I'd see Charlie, I'd see what he would talk about, and so many other great conservative leaders, and it really made me think, like, it made me question what I had always been raised to believe. And that's really kind of where it all started. And then, like I said, from there, I kind of just started getting involved in Turning Point. That was really my ticket into politics. And then on the partisan side, getting very involved with campaigns and things like that. And just really, really sparked a passion for me.
No, that's great. I didn't even think about that. Our community, our friends, and everyone that we connect with play a role in shaping the person and the people that we become. So you always think COVID, there's all kinds of downsides to the lockdown, but you just brought up a very good point of a positive from it, where it gave you the opportunity to open your view and take a different perspective because you wasn't around that community or that group that you've associated with. So that's interesting. I didn't even think about that spin of how you step out of your zone and learn something different during COVID. So very good.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, hopefully, the lockdown was crazy for a lot of people. Even as an introvert myself, it got to a point where I was like, okay, we need social interactions, but I think, I think people should challenge the way they think, whether they're a conservative or a liberal. I think they should do research, and not necessarily to try and change their mind, but just to understand what other people think. And that's what I challenge the students to do so much. I'm like, it's awesome that if you were raised in a super rock solid, strong Christian conservative household, and then you're a Christian conservative, that's awesome. We need that. We need that passion, and we need these strong people. But the best way to strengthen your belief system and strengthen your faith is by understanding what the world has to offer, right? And why those other options are wrong, and they're not going to lead to the prosperity of you, your family, your community, and your nation. So research, figure out what the left thinks, figure out, if you're on the left, figure out what the right thinks and why they think that. That's the most important thing. And you'll have a better understanding of how people that you may scratch your head and think, gosh, why would they ever hold that belief?
Right.
You might really get an understanding of, like, okay, maybe it's not the craziest idea in the world. I may disagree with it, but they're people. They're trying to live their lives and do the right thing for their families and their communities. So that's something else I kind of really took out of that lockdown, was just, that's where it starts. You got to open up your heart, open up your mind to the reality that other people might have different political beliefs, and that those beliefs are worth respecting. You can debate them, you can have those disagreements and those discussions, and do that. That's what's beautiful about this country. But, I think that really is going to lead to the healing of a lot of our political divide in this country, is really just people stepping out and doing that research and getting a little uncomfortable sometimes with what they hear, the media they consume. Listen to those opposing perspectives so you understand what they have to say.
Right. Yeah, I can agree more. It's putting your perspective in other people's shoes and hearing where they've come up. We've all taken different paths in lives to get to where we are today, but to have an understanding and compassion for the human nature of all of us. That's one of the questions I wanted to follow up on. Is you talk about turning a point and changing from your perspective. How do you help these college students and the younger generation move from wanting change to actually living change?
Yeah, exactly. So something I always say to the students is, it's one thing to, preach the values on campus. That's awesome. And that's very important. We need that voice, right? But it's another thing to actually get out in the community and make change, right? So as a chapter leader at Florida State, when I ran the Turning Point chapter at Florida State, one of the biggest things that I emphasized was, look, we have the state capitol building a couple blocks from campus. You guys, if you care about the issues, if you care about advocating for your conservative beliefs, there is no better place to do it. Yes, do it on this college campus, like what we're doing, but also get into that state capitol building. That's what I did when I was 18 years old. I was like, I need to find a way to get a job in there to, advocate and fight for the values that I care about. And actually my work, I wanted my labor to contribute to the movement and the beliefs that I cared about. So I mean, never mind the fact that it's great, resume building experience and, just great experience in general for a college student to have an internship or a job in their state government. But also, we're so blessed to be in such a great, ruby red state of Florida that so much great conservative legislation is always getting passed and signed into law that we can play a role in that. I mean, even I worked in the House clerk's office, which is technically a nonpartisan office in the House, but simply, participating in that legislative process when we were passing the 6-week abortion ban and universal school choice and all this stuff, it was so awesome to be part of that. And that's something, again, that I really emphasize with the students. Get out there, get involved. Maybe the legislature isn't for you. Maybe you want to do campaign stuff. I love that. Go knock doors, go wave signs for a candidate, go volunteer or work for them. We got 2026 coming up. That's something I strongly encourage them to do. And really any other way that you want to get involved politically, socially, whether you care more about, the faith aspect of it, go pursue that route and everything. It's so important, no matter what you do. There's so many important aspects of politics and culture that need to have good conservative Christian representation. And so that's something that we always need to be doing on and off campus. And it's just something that I really emphasize with the students all the time.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think doing that, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you've had a lot of criticisms from your past friends and current friends and social media now. So what's some advice that you can give to everyone else that's going to be on social media, that's going to step out and try to get into these situations to deal with the criticism or the disagreements that they're getting?
Yeah. So the most important thing is to remember, well, I would say fundamentally recognize the human dignity of the person you're talking to, right? Whether that's on social media or in person. Look, the funny thing is, in person, when you're actually on campus, I'm on campus 4 out of the 5 work days every week. I'm on a different campus in the Florida Panhandle. My territory also extends into Alabama and a bit of Georgia as well. So I'm on a lot of different college campuses, and you meet pretty much every single ideology you could think of, from the right, left, center, and everything in between. And you learn how to have conversations with people. And, debating is awesome and fun, but I like to just find common ground with people. And because I think that's so much more beneficial than wasting your time constantly arguing. Yes, the disagreements, obviously, you need to iron those out. You need to figure out, what the best ideas are. But when I'm on a college campus, a lot of students, when they're passing by our table that has pins and stickers and all the stuff that we hand out for Turning Point, a lot of them don't even want to interact. So the ones that do come up and interact, I honor that and I appreciate that and value that, because this is an opportunity to potentially plant a seed into their head of what a conservative or what a Christian truly is, right? That might be the first time they're ever interacting with a conservative, maybe outside of the internet, right?
Right.
And that's what it took for me, right? When I was on the left, I needed to have strong conservatives and strong Christians in my life who were willing to sit down with me and have conversations. And even if they were brief, even if they were, very gentle, soft, again, planting of seeds, basically, that's all it takes. And so that's something I remind the students to be mindful of. Again, whether they're talking on social media or they're talking in a group chat or they're talking when they're tabling and representing Turning Point on their campus, you have the responsibility and the duty to recognize the human dignity of the person next to you, understand what has led them to believe what they believe, and then try to, debate all you want, but then try to find some common ground at the end, because that way you guys can both leave the conversation knowing that, we may disagree on this deep moral issue or something like that, which is very important, but we also can find some common ground in some other area. And we can maybe even work towards, providing solutions for that common ground belief that we share, whether it's on our campus or in our community or anything like that.
Right, definitely. I mean, that's great. You brought up planting seeds, and that's one of the things we've taught my son through our entire life and through our Christian background is God puts on our hearts to do something, whether we agree with what we're doing or not, donating to somebody, giving, involved in politics. Always be the seed sower. You're planting a seed. You don't know where God's going to grow that or change it over time, but do it from a human aspect, not from you're trying to get something out of it, but you're all human. We're all in the same community together. So how do we become better from that? And I think one of the pieces is it's hard now is social media. I'm in IT, in my IT background. That stuff starts just to trend what it thinks you want to see. So how do you continue to post on X? You have a good following and get your own voice out there and staying true to yourself without getting put into the wrapper of what those analytic tools were putting behind you.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part, right, with social media is that you do just have these echo chambers almost that are created. And something I try to do is I'm like, okay, well, I'm in Republican politics, I'm in conservative politics just by the nature of my beliefs. And, it doesn't even necessarily mean I agree with the entire RNC 2024 platform or whatever. But, that's just the way things are. It just kind of funnels you into those categories. And so what I try to do is I try to be kind of that light and that fresh air almost where I can approach conservatives and be like, hey guys, this is how, like, let's keep fighting for our beliefs. Let's fight strongly for the things that we care about, but let's also do it with that same thing that I tell students with a respect for human dignity and respecting somebody else's opinions. That's something that I've personally tried to work on over the years. It's really easy when you're younger to, just kind of go all full on firebrand and full on, very, very, uh, very exciting rhetoric and language and all that stuff. And that's awesome. There's a time and place for that, definitely. But I think we have a duty as people with followings on social media to be reasonable. You can be extremely passionate. I'm extremely passionate about lots of issues like, the pro-life cause and things like that. But, I can be very passionate about that while also, working on my language, working on my rhetoric and making sure it's something that's actually approachable, because again, it always goes back to when I used to be a leftist, would I have been able to go up to me today and have a conversation, and potentially have my mind changed? And I think that's something important that we need to do. Beyond social media, I really like to make sure that I have a balanced consumption of news and media. So something else I tell students and I try to encourage with people in general is, listen to the CNN and MSNBC, not because you necessarily agree with it, and it doesn't have to be long or whatever, but just understand their talking points, understand what they're saying. I try to listen to the New York Times and NPR and all this other stuff on top of all the great conservative content out there. Because that's where I find that I'm able to actually calm down. When we're in the echo chambers, our heart rate is pumping. We're so mad. We're so angry at the left, or we're super passionate about what we're fighting for. But when you listen to the other side, your heart rate actually might go down a little bit and you might be a little bit more calm and level headed and say, okay, I obviously don't agree with what they're saying, but now at least I know exactly what they're saying. It's not being told to me by somebody else, right? This is their exact words. How would I reinforce my beliefs to counter that, And that honestly helps me a lot. So I would say be mindful of the types of news media you're consuming, and then also just be mindful of the language and the rhetoric that you're using. Be passionate, be super vocal about the issues you care about, but just be mindful.
Yeah, do a great point. I mean, diversify the information we get. That's huge for everybody else. Just to take the time to listen to the other side, whether you agree or disagree. But you're always going to get different viewpoints, and that may change your viewpoint a little bit. And that perspective is like, I didn't think of it that way. So you can come to common ground, as you say, and say, I understand why you believe this now. Like I can see where you followed this path to get you to where you're at today. So always encourage everyone. Diversify the information you're getting. Don't rely on social media because it's going to provide the analytics and you're just going to be in the vacuum of that for the entire time. What in social media or in the conversations that you have is a line that like you refuse to engage in, as you say, your tone that you're talking to from people and perspective when you're out in the community?
Something I really try to avoid doing is generalizing the left and the Democratic Party as I'll take this back. There's acts of violence that happen all the time in this world, and in this country, unfortunately, and it's horrible and it's tragic. And there's political acts of violence done by extremists and horrible human beings who have, mental illnesses and or who were, for whatever reason, raised a certain way, or their environments affected them, or whatever the case may be. And they go and do horrible tragedies. They'll go and do mass shootings, or they'll go and, whatever the case may be. And I think it's something that I really started to understand after I was on campus when a school shooting happened at Florida State this past spring. We were tabling with our Turning Point chapter when that happened, and we had to run and get off campus. And you know, um, in the aftermath of that, seeing the immediate both sides really just jumping and being like, it's the Republicans' fault and it's the Democrats' fault, like on both sides. I was like, hold on one second, we have no idea anything about this situation, or the context or anything. And then seeing that, in other acts of violence that happened in the aftermath of that, right? And something I really try to emphasize and hold myself to is I don't want to be blaming an entire mainstream American political party that half the country follows for the evil acts of one person, right? Just as I wouldn't want somebody to blame me for something that, I don't know, some far right Nazi extremist or whatever does if they go and, do something evil. I wouldn't want to do that to somebody on the left. And I think that's something that really people fall into the trap of. And I know I have in the past. And it's something that I really think we should avoid, because just blaming people like that, blaming entire, like I said, mainstream political parties in the United States or movements that have nothing to do with violence, that leads to that, a lot of that division that we are so frustrated with, that political divide in this country. And I think when we step away from that and stop doing that and stop, holding the actual people accountable rather than entire movements, I think that's where we could start healing, a lot more.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, how do you think that we get out of the chamber that we're in today? What are some things that you personally just think that we can get out of the way we are from being so decisive? I mean, social media plays a huge role in this. The news does, because as soon as something does happen, we just start blaming movements. And to my own opinion, I think it's because it's scared. They've got nervousness of seeing these big moves of change, whether it's Republican or Democrat or the MAGA or America First, that they get nervous about losing their own positions of power. So how do we get out of us as a community? Let's just use the Panhandle here, of focusing on being a community versus immediately calling the left, the right, the problem, or whatever the social issue is.
I think you kind of hit it right there when you said the social media issue. I think getting off the internet is a huge, huge part. And I think that's something that my generation is going to struggle with really for our entire lives. We were raised with the internet, with, our life. And that's how we know how to communicate. That's how we know how to connect with friends and family and all this stuff. And of course, every generation is involved with the internet now, but getting off the internet and just getting in the community. And, that's something that I really appreciated about my work with Turning Point, is that I'm able to stay off my phone and off social media and just get on a college campus and set up a table. And yeah, the stuff I have, it's conservative. And, people, you end up realizing that people, even the people that would probably yell and scream at you in your comment sections on social media, they're barely willing to even glance at you because they're too afraid to even have a conversation face to face. And the ones who are a lot more level-headed, even more left-wing people, I find. I mean, I'll have people that'll come up and be like, I'm a democratic socialist, or whatever the case may be, but even they'll have reasonable conversations, whereas normally on social media, they would be in their own echo chamber and I would be in my own echo chamber. And anytime we crossed paths, it would be all out war in the comment section, right? But that's just not the reality in person. And I think, yeah, getting off the internet, and then just being mindful of the media we consume, and then I mean, look, we have a free market system in our country, right? Where and that goes beyond just economics. That goes with everything that we do, everything we choose to consume, whether it is the culture, the media, the entertainment, the communities, the businesses, everything like that. Is a community, particularly a Northwest Florida community, should be focused on uplifting the people and the organizations and the businesses and the groups that are advocating for communities to come together and bridge political divides, cultural divides, things like that. Again, never at the expense of our values, but still with a focus of like, guys, we're all humans at the end of the day. We need to have these conversations. We need to have healthy conversations. We need to be a community again. And yes, the internet is helpful. It's a tool, but that's not our entire lives. And so let's step away from the internet. Let's get outside. Let's touch some grass, as Gen Z say, and just get out there and experience this beautiful world that God's created. I mean, there's so much more fulfilling things to do in life than doom scroll on TikTok or X.
Right. I mean, absolutely. You can get stuck in that, and all day long, you're like, 3 hours later, what did I do? I've been stuck in comment sections. So, and especially, right, my son's young, and that generation, they grew up with the phones and the devices, and that's all they communicate. I mean, they're constantly texting and calling. We do hang out and play pickleball and everything else, but how can we transition the current generation, the next generation, to be more motivated to post positive things instead of just clickbait that's going to get them new followers or likes or the most comments? Do you have any advice for that? Is that changing the way we're working a community, adding more faith values to the next generation, or what are some ideas you think behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of the issues, political and cultural issues, it starts in the home, right? So I think it's very, very important for parents to make sure that they're in tune with their kids. And look, I mean, I'm not a parent yet. I'm looking forward to eventually having a family someday. But I think it's so important from what I've seen with my peers. The ones who tend to be more isolated and on the internet and in their echo chambers and in their own little worlds and the ones who will struggle with whether it be depression or anxiety or stress or things like that because of the internet, because of politics, because of whatever, those peers tend to be the ones that are more disconnected from their families, for whatever reason. Their parents maybe have really crazy work schedules and they're just not able to devote as much time to their kids, and that's not their fault necessarily. But I think we need to be extremely careful and just mindful of how our kids are doing in life, right? Because it starts before they're even on the internet, before they're even asking like philosophical questions about like, who am I and why am I here? It starts with literally just having simple conversations with kids, at a younger age about, how much they're loved, how much they're appreciated and cared about, and connecting them with networks of friends and mentors and support groups that love them and care about them and making them feel valued. And then, whether that's church groups or whatever, that's definitely the ideal, having strong faith-based communities that are there to help raise your kids. Because I get it, raising a kid is extremely, extremely difficult, especially for new parents, and they need all the support they can get. And I think, unfortunately, our culture and our society has pushed this idea that parents need to parent a certain way and they need to funnel their kids through the public education system. And it gets to a point where the kid goes through 18 years of their first 18 years of their life, and it's almost like they barely saw their parents at any points of it, other than when they got home from school for an hour, maybe, if they weren't doing homework, and then they're off to college and then they're on with their life, and there's the huge level of disconnection. And then on the parent side, right, parents are encouraged to work more longer hours, right, and they're pressured by society to do that kind of stuff. And dads end up staying late at the office and skipping the soccer game or whatever. And again, I don't blame either side necessarily. I think it's the culture that's put this pressure on the kids and the parents. And I think if we rejected that kind of stuff and we brought these families together and reinforced them with strong community networks, I think you'd see a lot more prosperous kids that really don't find a ton of fulfillment on the internet, and they're much more inclined to go outside and explore and spend time with their friends in person, go on bike rides around the neighborhood and stuff, I mean, do things that kids are supposed to be doing as they're growing and developing and becoming, young adults. I think that's really the key. So it's the cultural component of restructuring the culture, and it really starts in the home and with what the parents are doing and how they're treating their children and how they're providing the livelihoods that their children need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, making sure that you're home with your kids for family night dinners a few times a week. I think some of the main problems you hit is exactly the hard part now. The pressures of work, the pressures of affordability, particularly in our area. I mean, we're in a little bubble where we're in a beach town. It's cost of living is pretty expensive to stay here for your kids to go to school. So both parents are usually working, sometimes multiple jobs to be able to afford to stay in the area that we're at. So, but still making that time to carve out for your kids and your family. And I think one of the key things that you hit on too is when you're making your kids go out and play and do the other activities is don't keep them, like you said, in that one particular group of friends. Try to help your kids diversify into their friend groups where they may have a set of Christian friends and they may have a set of non-Christian friends, and that's okay. But continuing to mold them in multiple experiences is going to be better for us in the future.
Definitely, yeah. And it's just a lot of these issues for me go back to, our political state now, and then really our culture. And like you were saying with the pressures and everything, it's really just unfortunate to see over this past century, I would say, I think, where our political leaders have really played a big role in pushing the modern culture that we have on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. And, it started with, the pressure with women, I think during feminism, to really get out and work, right? And of course, business leaders and these CEOs of corporations would love to have, this more labor, right? And, the government loves that they can tax people more, right? Because more people are working, and they really don't care about these family relationships that are being destroyed, right? They really don't care that they're ripping families apart, especially in minority communities, in Black communities where fathers are getting ripped away, and the government is getting these families addicted to these welfare programs, really, and dependent on these welfare programs. And so much of our modern problems have been caused by political elites on both sides that have no care for these communities that are struggling. And, they don't care about the affordability issues because they say, oh, we'll just work more hours, oh, just get a better job. And then at what expense? Your kid is going to be totally disconnected from you. You're never going to be able to truly raise them the way you want to. And, I mean, I look at my own example. I had an absolutely amazing mom that has raised me and my sister. And, she was a single mom, right? And she had to do what she had to do to help raise us. And we had an amazing childhood. And, I credit her with, the person that I am today. She's the reason that I'm able to even kind of have this mindset when I approach like conversations with people I disagree with, because me and her don't see eye to eye on everything. But anyway, she had to sacrifice so much for us, and she continues to sacrifice so much, and she would have loved nothing more than to be able to stay at home, entire childhood and nurture us and care for us and raise us. And we still had absolutely amazing experiences together, me and my mom and my sister growing up. But, she was forced to have to work to take care of us, right? Because that is the world we live in. Work is a wonderful thing. Everybody should contribute to society and do that kind of stuff. Again, at what cost? Are we impacting the social components of our communities and these families, that are really getting harmed? And I saw other single parent homes, again with my peers, that struggled a lot more than us. And unfortunately, they didn't have the same opportunities that I did that I did to be with my mom and to build that relationship, because that's so important, and I think kids are really missing out on that.
Yeah, and not to say that contributing to society has got to be through work. There's all kinds of other ways to do that. Charity, communities, support your neighbors. There's a whole spectrum of how you can contribute to society, instead of just using the system that's created. I agree. Our politicians, I think, for the past few decades have started to really get out of touch with the communities and the representatives that they focus on. And I have an idea that it started when the social media come into effect, and they didn't have to come back and talk to their communities or their representatives. They can just have a Facebook following of everyone in there, or Twitter following, and not really hear what's going on with their communities. And I'm hopeful that our next generation of leaders that step up and start challenging some of these other congressional players and federal players that are in touch with the community and not with the political machines.
No, yeah, it's huge. And that's why I emphasize so much primaries, Republican primaries. I mean, we need to hold our leaders accountable. And, I get so sick and tired of, people, again, they're complaining on the internet, they complain on social media. My congressman is not conservative enough. He's not representing my family's values in Washington. He doesn't care about us. He's, enriching himself with these stock trades and all this other stuff. And he's been in here for 20 plus years or whatever. and then they don't vote in their primaries, and then they vote right. They either skip the primary or they go and vote in the primary for the same guy that's been causing all the problems, right? And that's why, yeah, again, I just emphasize so much, you need to vet the candidates and constantly evaluate the performance of your elected officials, because if you don't do that, they will run away and they will go to DC, and they will live, a lavish lifestyle, and they'll enjoy their time there. And then before you know it, it's decades later and they're still there, and that's why it's so important for people of all ages to get involved in the political process. And if you care about the issues that matter, get out there, get involved, become, a precinct committee man or committee woman with your local, Republican Party. Like I said at the beginning, knock doors for the candidates that you care about. That's the doors win elections. People
Yep.
need to understand that. Regardless of the endorsements or the financial backing, if you can get out there and you can hit doors and you can talk to voters, that can totally sway the way a district ends up voting. And you can send a genuinely good conservative Christian patriot to Washington, as opposed to, some establishment figure who really isn't there to represent your interests. And no, you're right. It's so important that we that we really just make sure we know who's actually representing us.
Right. I agree. And do you ever think that the system or that I think it can be changed? I think it can be corrected over time. But if you had a crystal ball that you were looking into and said, our political situation here in the U.S. is going to change, where we get out of this rhetoric that we have and we come back and start solving common problems and not worry whether we're Democrat, Republican, or independent. Do you think that can happen again? And in what time frame?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it'll be. I tell a lot of people it'll be very interesting when like Gen Z becomes the majority in Congress. I don't think all our problems will be fixed. I'm not one of these people who goes and says, "Oh, my generation's the best" or whatever. Right?
Right.
Every generation has its strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons, things like that. But I think that there will be a lot of issues that Gen Z Democrats and Republicans will be able to unify over that maybe previous generations couldn't. Right? And I think a lot of that comes down to the policies about foreign policy, I would say, but then also just like the America first messaging and mindset, right? I think a lot of generations before us, at least from my perspective, have kind of prioritized, globalist economic efforts, right? To, I mean, I get the arguments, right? Oh, everybody gets richer, right? The poor third world country gets richer because they get jobs when we ship them overseas. And, we're just going to learn to code or whatever, right? And we're going to like be prosperous and everything. But the reality is that's not always happened. And you look at a lot of our, Midwestern, factory towns and a lot of other communities across America that have been hollowed out because of, again, efforts on both sides by Republicans and Democrats. I think that's the kind of stuff that Gen Z can unify over. Like, hey, no, we want to bring the jobs back. Hey, no, we want to advocate for American interests, America first interests. We want to advocate for families and workers, and we want to prioritize our people before we send, billions overseas to foreign countries that really don't always care about us and all of our interests. And so I think that's going to be something awesome to see. Now, of course, there's going to be still going to be a lot of divides, especially on moral issues. I think as our country, as certain groups become more secular and things like that, fortunately, we've seen Gen Z shift in the direction of faith, thankfully, over these past several years. And I hope that those trends continue. They're finding Jesus like I did, and they're grounding themselves in something that matters more than even politics and all the worldly things. And that's awesome. But I think there is going to be a lot of those deep moral and ethical divides that will continue to grow, whereas previous generations, maybe the baby boomer generation, they didn't really have as many because, a lot of people growing up in the 50s and the 60s could agree that, yeah, we should not do abortion. That's not really a great thing,
Right.
whether you're Republican or Democrat. Now, that's a different conversation. So it'll be interesting. I don't know if we'll necessarily always will be able to perfectly heal this divide, but I think if you narrow it down to issue specific conversations about each topic, I think you'll see more unity as time goes on.
Yeah, and circle that all the way back to this whole part. I think it all starts back in your community. Faith, above all, can change the whole generation. And just starting in your inner circle. You can't change the whole world by trying to get the elephant in one bite. There's no way that's going to happen. Start off small, make an impact in your community and a difference there. During this whole process of everything that you've been involved with, what's one of the hardest lessons that you've learned?
Man, that's a good question. I think it probably ties in a lot to kind of what I was saying earlier about, you really have to be mindful of the words you choose when you communicate with people. Because again, it's really easy to jump into social media, jump into politics and say, I'm going to be the most fiery, I'm going to be the most vocal, I'm going to be the most controversial. Again, there's a place and time for that, right? But for the most part, I try to think, what do I want my legacy to be? When, decades down the road, when I'm retiring or when I'm just stepping away from all of this stuff, what do I want to be known for? And would I prefer to be known for as the guy who was, super edgy and controversial and, you know, very passionate, which is awesome. But like, do I want to be known as that guy? No, I want to be known as someone who is very faith driven, very passionate about the issues I care about, but somebody who you were able to sit down at the dinner table with and have a conversation with regardless of where you stood. That's kind of what I want to be known as. And so that's kind of something I've had to learn, and I continue to develop and learn and try to understand that more as time goes on and I get more involved in politics. That's something, I want to work on perfecting as much as I can. And I'll look at people both on the right and the left who I think are good examples of that, whether it be politicians or activists or whatever. People who, again, very passionate about the issues they care about, very staunchly, they do not compromise, they do not bend, they do not whatever. But on other issues that aren't as like serious moral issues, they're willing to have that compromise. They're willing to meet in the middle sometimes even. And even when they are having those super passionate debates about their strong moral beliefs, they're able to do so with dignity and respect. So wherever, God brings me in my life, whether I'm in elected office or whatever I'm doing, I want to make sure that I'm focused on that. And that's really, I think, my biggest takeaway so far in my journey in politics is, it's easy to be the flamethrower.
Right.
It's a lot harder to be the one that sits down and has the tough conversations and ideally tries to find some middle ground.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I commend you for doing that now, especially at your age, to be able to sit in the room. That's all we need to do and listen. Listen more than we're speaking to everyone that we're able to sit with. There shouldn't be any time and place that we're just divisive just for being in the same room together. So congratulations on doing that, and continue to do that as you get through the politics, because some people get through there and change, and it's tough. As I ask all the guests that's on the show here, since we really focus on the Panhandle, what's one of the biggest issues that you see facing our region right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think we have a serious issue in our state government where the interests of the Panhandle are just kind of ignored, whether it's, our environmental concerns, right, preserving our natural beauty, whether it's reviving these small towns and these rural communities, or all the other issues, from Pensacola all the way over here, towards Tallahassee. I find so often that, this is my favorite region of this state, right? And unfortunately, I feel like our state government is run by everyone but Panhandle residents, right? Of course, we have representatives that do their best, but, when you have leaders that are always from South Florida or like Miami, Southwest Florida or Tampa area, that's awesome. Those people in those communities are awesome. But I like to always remind people, like, this is the real Florida,
Right.
St. Augustine to Pensacola, that is the real Florida, the original Florida. And I think it's important that those interests are recognized. And I think what's awesome is we're seeing a lot of candidates and people, political figures that are coming out and saying, you know what, it's time to start caring about the interests again, right? James Fishback is a name that obviously comes to mind. He can be a controversial guy. I definitely get it. But I'm really excited to see his involvement in the gubernatorial race coming out, because I think that his questions that he's asking, the issues that he's bringing up, you can see it's a lot very Panhandle focused. He's talking about issues all across the state, but Panhandle focused. I mean, the rail, the Amtrak rail going through the Panhandle was something that he was talking about that I'm like, yes, we need this,
Right.
I remember taking a trip on Amtrak from Jacksonville up to Boston one time. And I'm like, man, it would be awesome if we could hop on a train, here in the Panhandle and head over to a place like Jacksonville or to Miami or Tampa or something like that. And having that type of transportation option would be huge. And then again, just all the other issues, agriculture, environment, reviving these communities and bringing this economic impact into these communities while respecting their history and tradition. I just think overall, those issues just need to be represented so much more and so much better in our halls of power in the state. So that's really what I'm kind of focused on, as I travel outside of my work from Turning Point is, making sure that we have good people that are willing to go and represent those issues in Tallahassee. Because again, I just, there's a reason that other regions in this state are represented more in leadership and things like that. And that's because, they step up and they volunteer themselves, and I think it's time that people in the Panhandle start doing that.
Yep, I agree more with everything that you said there. There's so much more that can be done here in the Panhandle to help the community and region that we're in, and people just gotta take the risk and step out and start changing them. And those are some great ideas from the rail system, agriculture, and all the above for the area. So I appreciate your time today. How do our listeners follow you on social media? I follow you. What are the best places for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on X, Instagram, Facebook. My X and Instagram handle is @real Owen Girard. You can also just Google me. I usually pop up pretty easily, and you can find all my social media there.
All right, perfect. Thank you for joining the Panhandle Pulse today. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.